Hello everybody, Mark aka The Nerdy Punk back with you again today for a new video. Tonight's video is going to be a response to the quarantine edition of the vinyl tag. So this would be the first vinyl tag that I have participated in. For whatever reason, I really hadn't been drawn to make any videos in the vinyl tags in the past couple of years. Largely because my collection is relatively small compared to a lot of the YouTubers in the VC, and I felt like I couldn't answer all of the questions. But with this edition, I love the 20 questions that were posed, and I can answer 90% of them with a record to show you. So I'm excited to do this, to get into this, and as I think other people have mentioned, with the quarantine situation, there's really nothing better for me to do. So plenty of time to do this as well. Alright, let's jump into this. That way this video doesn't get to be forever long. First question was an album or artist from your home state or home city. I am from Illinois, and I have lived in Illinois my entire life. So with Illinois, we of course have the city of Chicago, and there's plenty of great music that has come out of the city of Chicago, but there's also a couple bands that have come out of other cities throughout the state as well. The first one I'm going to show three artists, or talk about three artists. I have two things to show you. These are not necessarily my favorite albums by these artists, but these are the artists that I chose for my three favorites from Illinois. First one is the Smashing Pumpkins, and this is their most recent album. It's not my favorite of theirs. My favorite is probably Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, but the Smashing Pumpkins are from Chicago. Great, obviously, alternative band from the 90s, and I'm sure everybody's familiar with the Pumpkins, but yeah. Smashing Pumpkins is my first pick. And then second pick from the state of Illinois is Cheap Trick. This is Cheap Trick live at Budokan, very famous live album. Cheap Trick is from Rockford, Illinois, and obviously they're notorious as well. A lot of people know about them and have listened to them, so I'm not going to be able to say anything new. My favorite Cheap Trick album is probably their first. Something that I was not familiar with about Cheap Trick is that they had a lot of their early sounds would go on to influence punk rock, which is my favorite genre. So I really love the sounds of their early records, but you're never going to go wrong really with a Cheap Trick album. Very catchy, fun stuff. And then my third pick, I don't have anything to show you. My third favorite band from the state of Illinois is Alkaline Trio, and they are a pop punk band from Chicago as well. I just realized that I don't own anything by Alkaline Trio on CD or vinyl. That's a shame. I need to change that quickly. But yeah, I wanted to give them a shout out as well. Alkaline Trio, fantastic band from my home state. Next one, something that I would highly recommend. So I have two things to show you for this one. The first is this album. This is the Soviets LP3. The Soviets are no longer active, but they made punk rock music in the early 2000s. Every record by them, I think they put out 3. Every one of them is fantastic, very catchy, melodic punk rock music. They feature a male and a female vocalist, so it's kind of an interesting sound dynamic there. But this is a very underrated album, and for this question I wanted to talk about some artists and albums that I think are kind of underrated, that don't get enough love around. So I wanted to kind of throw some love their way. The Soviets, very good stuff. This one you can find at Fat Records, which I'm going to talk about that label quite a bit throughout this video. The second one that I would highly recommend is Taj Mahal's self-titled record. believe this is his first record. Came out in the late 1960s, I think. This is a very cool pressing. It's a limited edition from Music on vinyl, and it has a colored blue vinyl. Taj Mahal is one of the most underrated blues guitarists out there. In my opinion, you know, everybody always talks about the greats like B.B. King and Muddy Waters. And those guys, obviously deservedly so. I love them as well. But Taj Mahal is fantastic. Very, very bluesy, emotional record. I love this one. So definitely highly recommended Taj Mahal. Next question. A tip for a beginner. So, I'm fairly new to collecting vinyl as well. I've only been buying records for 3 years. My very first vinyl record was Green Day's Revolution Radio. And my first full length. I had bought several 7-inches prior to that, but that was my first full length record. And that came out in October of 2016. So I've only been collecting for 3 years. I'm a bit of a beginner myself. I only have around 100 records in my collection, so pretty small compared to everyone else in the VC. But one of the things that I would recommend is to buy records that you love and collect records because you love collecting them. Don't do it to please anybody else. Don't go buy something just because somebody else thinks you should have it. Like, there are tons of classic records that everybody else seems to love that I don't, and I don't own in my collection, and that's perfectly fine with me. And I think that you should collect what you love. Don't waste $20-25 on a record that you're not going to listen to. Another sort of tip that I would have for new people who maybe are discovering music along with vinyl is look for record labels that you enjoy the bands on. So like with me, when I started getting into vinyl, I started listening to bands that I liked. I would find out what record label they were on, and then I would go look at other bands that were signed to that record label. It's really great within the punk community because there's a lot of great independent punk labels like Epitaph and Fat Records that produce a lot of similar sounding music. And that's one of the ways that I've been able to expand my music knowledge and expand my collection as well. So look out for record labels. Number 4, an album that got me into deeper music. So I'm going way back to the beginning of my love affair with music. Green Day's Dookie. So this is the album that I would say changed my relationship with music forever. I've told this story several times in my life, but and on this YouTube channel. But when I was in high school and younger, I really didn't. I always enjoyed music, but I never really had a relationship with it. I never really felt anything emotionally from music. Never really felt that connection to it. The bulk of my listening in high school was stuff that was popular and stuff that my friends were listening to. And I never really had a connection with it because it was just so superficial. And you guys know pop music today. It's all about, like, there's very little substance to it. And the only other types of music I would listen to in high school is, like, adult top 40 stuff, like pop rock bands like Maroon 5 and Train, and basically any band that would have a love song played during an emotional scene of, like, Smallville or something. I would listen to, like, the songs on those shows and maybe listen to them and have a good cry. But that's really all my entire relationship with music. And then in my early college years, I discovered Green Day and this record. And that completely changed how I viewed music at all. Completely. Made it to where music is one of my top 5 favorite things in life. And it all started with records like Dookie, An American Idiot. And yeah, this pretty much kind of changed everything for me. Yeah, Green Day was the life-changing band, as I'm sure you know if you watch my videos. Let's see, next one. An obscure record. So I don't have a whole lot of obscure stuff and like rare stuff. This is one that I thought of. This is a record by The Go, which was a garage rock band in the late 90s in Detroit, featuring Jack White of course, the White Stripes and the Raconteurs and all that stuff. I'm sure a lot of the VC is familiar with Third Man Records, which is where this came from. This came from the Third Man Records vault. And to my knowledge, before they released it, there was copies of this record were very, very limited. And you can't like stream it anywhere. It's not available in the streaming services. So the Third Man Records vault is one of the only places that you could find this record. And of course you can't order it anymore because the vault is a subscription service where you have to sign up ahead of time in order to get their releases. So this is a pretty obscure thing. I guess everything that I get in the vault is obscure, but to me this is kind of the most obscure because it's really hard to find out there in the wild. So this is The Go. If you happen to find a copy of this record, even if it's not the vault edition, I would pick it up because it's really catchy garage rock stuff. Next one. A group that you collect all of their music. So I don't own every record by this band, but I own most of them. And this is Against Me. This is their first record, Reinventing Axl Rose. Against Me is one of my top 5 favorite bands of all time. I could have easily substituted someone like Green Day into this slot, but I wanted to kind of change it up because I talk about Green Day all the time. And I'm going to talk about Green Day again later on in this video. But this is a great album, Reinventing Axl Rose, and a great band. Punk rock. Their early stuff, especially this record, is kind of an acoustic punk, and also with a lot of anarchy themes as well. So really interesting lyrics, kind of extreme, I don't know, extreme, but maybe some radical lyrics, some kind of crazy stuff, but really, really great band. If you haven't been listening to them, you need to. Against Me. Next one, a band whose second album was better than their first. This is a controversial selection, but I'm going for it. This is Weezer with Pinkerton. Now, a lot of people would say the Blue Album, which was Weezer's first record, was their best. And I love the Blue Album. Like, Pinkerton is my favorite. Blue Album is number 2. But I think Pinkerton just goes so much deeper. It's by far Weezer's most personal record. The lyrics, I think, have a lot more meaning to it. It's kind of a sad, emotional record as well. A lot of Weezer's music is kind of more upbeat and cheery, and there's not a whole lot of, stuff to analyze with them. But this record is the complete opposite. It's very personal. It was written, I think, in a relatively dark time in River's life. And I really, really love this record. I think it's an absolute masterpiece. It's also one of Weezer's heaviest sounding records. Yes, Pinkerton. My opinion is better than the Blue Album. Alright, number 8 is a whack-a-mole, which I did not know this terminology, but apparently a whack-a-mole is where you reach in and grab a random record out of your collection. So just to show you guys, for posterity's sake, I have one of my crates of records right here. I'm going to reach through and grab a random one while not looking at it. If I can grab a hold of something. Ah! Good pick. Okay, so this is Sleater-Kinney with No Cities to Love. Sleater-Kinney, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with them. Really good alternative rock band. This is one of their more recent albums. Very, very good, very catchy, enjoyable rock music. So yeah, pretty good selection here. Next one. If I'm looking over a lot, it's because I got the list over here and I'm trying to figure out where I am. Number 9 is my most listened to album. So my most listened to album of all time is probably Green Day's American Idiot. And I own that on CD, but I believe my CD copy is in my car, and I really don't feel like walking all the way downstairs to get to my car. So instead, I'm going to mention that one, but then I'm also going to talk about Blink-182's Enema of the State. If American Idiot is my most played album, this is definitely my second most played album. I've listened to this so many times. Such a great classic pop-punk album from the very late 90s. I actually got into this album and Blink-182 even before I got into Green Day. Again, I didn't really listen to them all that in depth, but I listened to this album because of their music being featured in the film American Pie. And that was one of my favorite comedies back in the day when I was, in my early teen years. Thought those were like the greatest movies ever made or something. But yeah, really funny, catchy, fun record. Enema of the State. All right, an album with a crazy story. So again, I don't have the physical copy with me, but I have something very similar. I'm going to talk about Antichrist Superstar by Marilyn Manson. And so there's a really crazy story behind how that record was made. While I'm talking about that, I'm going to show you Hollywood by Marilyn Manson. And you could imagine Marilyn Manson. There's probably a lot of crazy stories about Marilyn Manson, but I think the environment that him and his band were in when they were making Antichrist Superstar, which was their second album, I believe, was especially nuts. So it was recorded over a period of several months, and during that time, most of the band members were constantly experimenting with drugs and having violent and very aggressive outbursts at each other and treating each other very poorly. Marilyn Manson himself was experimenting with things like sleep deprivation and monitoring his pain thresholds. Like, one of the things that they said he would do is he would stick sewing needles underneath his fingernails and just poke at them to see how high his pain threshold was. I mean, insane stuff that they were doing. Manson has talked about how he did that because he wanted to put himself in a emotionally painful and depraved state so he could get in the mind of the character of that album. Of course, Antichrist Superstar is a concept record, as is Hollywood. It's a part of a trilogy of albums. They're all concept records. So, on top of all of that crazy stuff, apparently it got so bad that one of the founding guitarists, Daisy Berkowitz, of that band, quit in the middle of recording the album. Just got up and left. They destroyed their instruments constantly, so they were constantly having to replace instruments. And the producer of the record was Trent Reznor, who's the man behind Nine Inch Nails. And I don't know if it was this record or if it was their first record, but I think part of this record was recorded in the Sharon Tate house, which most people are familiar with. Sharon Tate was the actress who was murdered by the Charles Manson family, and the murders took place in that house. And Trent Reznor had bought the house and set up a recording studio in it. So that just makes it even more creepy and insane and crazy. So definitely an insane story behind the making of Antichrist Superstar. Of course, this is Hollywood. I own Antichrist Superstar on CD, but I can't find my copy of it, so this had to do. All right, pretty crazy stuff. Number 11 is my collecting pet peeve. Now, I'm not really going to talk too much about record collecting, but I am going to talk a little bit about the punk scene with this. My biggest pet peeve is what I would call the punk rock police. These are people who go out of their way to tell somebody that what you're listening to is not real punk rock. It's not punk. And this is usually directed at bands like Green Day and Blink-182, stuff that I really like, the pop punk sound. To me, punk has always been more about a mindset than a specific sound. Punk is about, to me, individuality and embracing your inner weirdness and finding a unity and a camaraderie within a community. And there's also like a little bit about rebelling against authority, and all those kinds of ideas make up what punk is to me. And I've always found and thought that that mindset is way more important than the actual sound of the music to decide what is actually punk. And I don't know, there's just something that I really hate about like people who have an elitist mindset, thinking that, oh, these bands are the ones that are actual punk and they're better than these bands. Like, everybody likes what they like. Like, why do you have to make somebody feel bad for liking what they like? If somebody wants to call Green Day punk, let them call Green Day punk. I like bands all across the spectrum of punk rock. Like, I love Green Day, I love the Ramones, but I also love, like, the Sex Pistols, and I also love bands like Black Flag, and everything across the spectrum. I don't see the point in making someone or some band feel like they're a lesser part of the community because they play a certain style of the music. So that's my major pet peeve. Number 12, the genre that people will be most surprised that you love. For this one, I'm going with country. I've talked a lot about punk rock, now that's my favorite genre. Kind of one of the opposites of punk rock is country music. And my love affair with country has been kind of a roller coaster. I've gone through times where I really love it, then I've gone through times where I really don't like it, then I've gone through times that I love it again. And I'm kind of embracing that side of my musical tastes lately. And a lot of that has to do with where I grew up. So I did not grow up in Chicago. I grew up in southern Illinois, probably about 5 hours south of Chicago. And when I was growing up, a lot of the people, a lot of my friends would either listen to pop music or country. And so I listened to a lot of it in high school. Some of my family is big fans of certain country artists. This album right here is Loretta Lynn's Coal Miner's Daughter. And this album is special to me for a specific reason. There was a movie about Loretta Lynn called Coal Miner's Daughter in which they performed this song. And my mom and dad owned the VHS tape of that movie. And that's probably one of the top 10 movies that I watched the most as a kid growing up. We didn't have a lot of money growing up, and we had a handful of VHS tapes that we would watch over and over again, and this was one of them. So I love this album and this song. Very catchy, very good. This came with the art print of Loretta there. But yeah, I'm a really big fan of country music, which is not something that you would expect from a punk rock fan. Next one, I'm going to try to pick it up a little bit. I've been talking forever. An interesting fact about, or actually no, sorry. An album from the year you were born. So I'm going to revisit something that I went over a few picks ago. Weezer's Pinkerton. This is my favorite album from the year I was born, which is 1996. And I feel like 1996 was kind of a down year for music. There wasn't a whole lot of great albums that came out that year, at least in the rock scene. And compared to years like 1994, which is one of my top maybe my favorite year in music altogether. But 1996 was kind of weaker. This is my favorite. I also talked about Antichrist Superstar was also released in 1996. So those two are kind of my two favorite records that were released in the year I was born. A 10-inch, and my thoughts on 10 inches. I don't have anything against 10 inches, it's just I don't own a lot of them. This may be the only one that I've owned, and I just bought it very recently. This is a Fat Records compilation. Fat music for wrecked people. This is one of the few ones that I've been able to order on their online site. It has a lot of cool songs on it. Some songs that are not, or previously unreleased. So like NoFX had a new song on here called Scarlet O'Heroin. And then there's several other new songs and stuff on here from the Fat Records catalog. Pretty cool. Interesting fact. So for this one, I'm going to talk about the White Stripes. So one of the interesting facts about the White Stripes is that it's a duo, or it was, they're no longer making music at the moment, but it's a duo of Jack and Meg White. And Jack and Meg White were a married couple around the turn of the century, the late 90s, early 2000s. But when they started, they told people that they were brother and sister, which was funny. And there's a lot of, Jack White was very secretive about his personal life, especially in his younger days. So he told a lot of stories about how Meg was his sister, and they were the youngest of like 8 kids or something like that. And a lot of interesting stories that he told about that. And in this set here, which is a set of live albums around the release of their debut, he actually introduces Meg as his sister on the drums in this record. So I thought that was kind of an interesting story. An album with an animal on the cover. Hope this counts. This isn't an actual animal, it's a drawing of an animal. But this is Screeching Weasel, Bark Like a Dog. Of course, there's several cartoon dogs there. I almost picked this one for the next question, which is a crazy cover. But, yeah, I picked this one for the dogs. Funny, interesting, good punk band from the 90s. So instead of that one, I went with this one for crazy artwork. This is Face to Face, Live in a Dive. Again on Fat Records. This is the most awesome cover art that I could find. Live in a Dive is a series of albums that Fat Records puts out of their bands performing a live show. And this artwork is fantastic. You can see the live show taking place in some sort of bar. There's a circle pit going on. And then right next to the circle pit is an opening to the gates of hell. But Satan is like the downstairs neighbor who's using his pitchfork to bang on the ceiling to tell the young people to shut up upstairs, which is really cool and really funny and such a unique idea. And the best part, on the back, Satan is trying to sleep and he's got his pillow covering his ears. Freaking hilarious. Such a crazy and fun cover to that. Great music as well. Something that you can find for cheap. So I went with kind of a generic pick here. I'm talking about the entire Fat Records catalog. So the records at Fat Records, brand new vinyl, is released for $12 a piece. A brand new record, sealed, for $12. That's about as good of a deal as you can find. So every single new release on black vinyl is $12, unless it's a double album, and then it's only like $16 or $15. The only time that it gets more expensive is with colored vinyl, and even then you can always find colored vinyl for less than $20. So this is another one of the Live in a Dive series. This was NoFX playing their album Ribbed live. So yes, Fat Records is not only a great punk label, but they release a lot of their music for very cheap and affordable prices. Number 19, we're almost to the end. An album that needs an acquired taste. So this is something that I had an acquired taste on, and I thought fit this question pretty well. This is the band Radiohead. This is one of their live albums called I Might Be Wrong, the live recordings. Radiohead was definitely an acquired taste for me, and I love them. They're one of my favorite bands of all time, but their music is very different. It's very experimental, especially their later albums. Like, if you were to put on Pablo Honey and listen to it, it sounds a lot just like generic alternative rock from the early 90s, but as they moved on, when they got to albums like OK Computer and Kid A especially, their sound began to become very electronic, very experimental, very unique, and something that I think you needed an acquired taste to enjoy. And a perfect story of that, when I was in college, I was hanging out with some friends, and we were just drinking, having a good time. We were passing around the aux cord so we could all play music for each other. And especially when I get several drinks in me, I start to get to that stage where I get kind of like a depressing drunk. And one of the bands that I go to when I'm in that state of mind is Radiohead. And I think if you're in the right mindset, it's amazing. If you're not, it's terrible and depressing. So somebody was like, what the hell is that depressing stuff? Like, change it to something else. And it really proves that it's kind of an acquired taste, and that it can sound kind of slow and depressing if you don't quite understand it. And it takes a few listens to understand it. So Radiohead, a fantastic band, but it takes a little bit to get into. Last one is my most recent pickup. This is Motley Crue, Shout at the Devil. This has kind of that distressed look to it, but I finally picked up my first Motley Crue record. I rewatched the Motley Crue movie on Netflix about a week or so ago, and then I ordered this because I realized I didn't have any Motley Crue vinyl. So I hope to collect all of their early albums, everything up to Dr. Feelgood. Alright, that's it. That was an exhausting video to make, but a fun video to make as well. So I hope you all enjoyed. If you're going to do a vinyl tag for this quarantine as well, I'd love to check it out and hear what you have to say about these pretty cool questions. So again, hope you enjoyed. If you did, leave me a like, hit the subscribe button down below to stay tuned for all of my future videos. Hope everyone is doing well out there and staying safe, and I will see you guys later. Bye.